An informal meeting of NATO foreign ministers in the Norwegian capital Oslo has taken place, where the ministers debated providing security guarantees for Ukraine, including Ukraine's desire to join the bloc. Why would not NATO approve Ukraine's membership? Well, the reason that was given, it can't do that when Ukraine is in the middle of a war. But is that really the case? Well, this is why Ukraine has attacked the Russian capital, Kiev, on a number of occasions, while Russia has increased its attacks on Ukraine's capital, Kiev, coming before a major summer offensive on Ukraine. The Ukraine war, the topic of this edition of the Spotlight. First, let me introduce our guests for this program. Joining us is Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst from Raleigh, North Carolina. Also joining us, John Busnich, journalist, activist, and political analyst who joins us from Belgrade. All right, welcome to you both. I'll start with you, John Busnich, if I may. You have this summit. NATO, in essence, is giving a message to the Ukrainian President Zelensky, who wants a security guarantee, but NATO comes out and says, well, we can't really give you a security guarantee right now. We don't know what that would entail. So if I'm getting this straight, NATO and the U.S. in particular, who's leading NATO, encourages Ukraine to continue the war with Russia, but when it comes to Zelensky wanting a security guarantee of some sort, they're like, well, no, we don't know whether we can give that to you right now. We don't know what it would be. Is that a correct interpretation of this?
Exactly right. In fact, Zelensky was hoping to be able to jump the line and pass over several of the procedures that are necessary to join NATO, procedures that Ukraine might not comply with. In return, NATO was seeing that there was a possibility that it might be pulled directly into the war in Ukraine and expose its own territories to direct Russian attack. That's a no-go for NATO because they're not prepared for that level of escalation. They're only prepared to fight to the last Ukrainian.
Well, when it comes to this, what you just said, why is NATO then not wanting to give a security guarantee based on the fact that you have that Article 5, I believe it is, when one gets attacked, then all have to counter-react, if I'm correct to understand it that way.
Yes.
Is it because they're ill-equipped to deal with Russia when it comes to a counterattack, let's say?
Well, basically, first of all, Ukraine does not have the right to act on that article because Ukraine is not a NATO member. Secondly, in terms of military doctrine, the existing NATO states already have several military defense plans that involve the deployment of all other NATO states' assets to protect those territories. There is no such plan in place for Ukraine, and it could not just be drummed up overnight. The entire situation is at risk for NATO because Ukraine is already at war with Russia, and it has lost considerable territory that has been legally annexed by Russia. And certainly Ukraine cannot be attempting to join NATO with territories that it doesn't even control. That's the crux of the issue for Ukraine. You can't join your entire country to an organization unless you control your entire country.
Sure. Let me bring in Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst who joins us on the phone from Raleigh, North Carolina. Ray McGovern, welcome. So I'm going to ask you the question I asked John Busnich when it comes to the security guarantee that the Ukrainian President Zelensky wants, where NATO says, this is something that I need to think about. I have to work out the logistics. But in the meantime, why don't you go and you continue this war? In the meantime, we'll provide you what we can. But if you want a guarantee, no, we can't give it to you right now. Is that one way of looking at this?
Yes, what I just heard briefly from the previous speaker is exactly right. Even bloc, for God's sake, from Germany, has made the point that how can you admit somebody to NATO, somebody who's already at war? What do? Make it ex post facto? Or, it's really crazy. What really the situation today is very, very dire because President Putin has made it clear that he's going to be striking at what he calls decision-making headquarters and centers. Now, that will be limited to Ukraine initially, And we already know that the Ukrainian military intelligence headquarters has been wiped off the face of the earth, probably with casualties including volunteers or other people, liaison people from the U.S., Germany, France, Britain. So that's already on record. That's 4 days ago. What I expect is an uptick in this kind of retaliation for what's been going on against Russia, and this can have a no good end, as the Chinese like to say. Escalation is the name of the game here, unless more sober minds in Washington see that the handwriting is on the wall. Ukraine cannot win.
Ray McGovern, based on your perspective, I want to ask this question because I think many perhaps are asking. I'm guessing again. When you look at the way that Russia is executing a special military operation, and when you look at the way that the Ukraine is going ahead in this its military engagements, and the way that NATO and the U.S. are acting, do you think they know what they're doing?
With all due respect, I think the Russians know quite well what they're doing. They consider this to be an existential threat, and they're going to guide themselves accordingly. Now, the supreme irony here, or what John Mearsheimer calls the supreme paradox, is that if I'm wrong, and the Russians do not win on the ground here, let's say they get pushed back even into Russia, and these bases alongside Poland and Romania, they're included in Ukraine, missiles that can reach Moscow in 5-10 minutes, all right? If that happens, the worst could happen, because that's when, and that's only when Russia might resort to nuclear weapons, tactical ones. I don't think that's likely, but the paradox is that the worse, the better it is for the U.S. and Ukraine, the worse it will be for the world at large, because nuclear weapons cannot be put once they start being used, we all need to hide under our desks, so to speak.
All right. John Busnich, taking a look at what the NATO Secretary General has said in this meeting that they had, it says that Ukraine's security must be guaranteed when the war with Russia ends. When you listen to this, what do you think? I mean, are they just the mere fact that they're saying when the war with Russia ends, and that they're mulling that over? It appears that they're mulling that idea over. Does that show anything? Does that signify that maybe they are indeed thinking sooner than later that this war is going to end? Perhaps they don't want to, loudspeaker that to the world, but maybe that's something they're mulling over at this point?
Well, obviously, any military planning is always based on trying to anticipate all of the possibilities. There is, I suppose, a mathematical possibility that Ukraine could win. I mean, maybe 1 in a million chance. That's looking positively at it from Ukraine's side. But the likelihood of Ukraine winning this battle is absolutely nil in real terms, because Russia cannot allow a NATO-armed and rocket-equipped Ukraine on its closest border. That's just not going to happen. And Russia, therefore, must win at whatever cost it takes to Russia, because that cost, whatever that cost is to Russia, it is less than losing all of Russia and having a nuclear war. So Russia will win in Ukraine, and it's just a question of whether Ukraine's leadership will depose the current president and put somebody who's willing to negotiate in office, or if that President Zelensky will be removed by the puppet masters who put him into office, who ran his campaign remotely and made him the president over a period of years. One way or the other, either Zelensky is going to have to change his stance and enter into negotiations, even if only to buy time, or Zelensky himself will be removed either internally or externally from his puppet masters in Washington.
Okay. Ray McGovern, the statements coming from Jens Stoltenberg and NATO as a whole are somewhat contradictory, and I want to take a look at a couple of them and ask you what you think about it. First of all, Stoltenberg, in the middle of some of the statements he made, talked about this decade-long program worth $500 million, or euros, I should say, per year to help, how he described Ukraine's military switch to Western standards. And then when you put that next to how Zelensky wants Ukraine to join NATO, well, they have come out, I guess, collectively and have said, not now. I think it was the German foreign minister who said, not now, you're in the middle of a war. Does the fact that Stoltenberg say that we're going to have you switch to this Western military, Western standards, that is, militarily, to the tune of $500 million a year, mean that they just want to accumulate military sales and NATO membership is just not in the question, not on their agenda?
Well, military sales, of course, is always in the background, but you have to realize who Stoltenberg is. He's a quisling. He has a direct line with Victoria Nuland, who is running this show, and what he says is what she tells him to say. Makes no sense at all. The Russians are prepared to end this thing within the year at most, and the question is, when they're at the brink of victory, what does Biden do in response to his sophomore advisors who tell him, well, okay, we have these little tactical nukes now too, but that can save the situation for us. So it's doubly dangerous in this respect because there's no suggestion to me that Biden is sensible enough to resist this idiot advice that he's getting from his sophomore advisors.
Okay, let's see here. So many topics to cover, John Busnich. I want to go to a statement that the German defense minister has made. Boris Pistorius. Stopping arms supplies to Ukraine would mean an immediate end of Ukraine. Quote, the end of arms deliveries means the end of Ukraine tomorrow. Of course, we have to deliver weapons as long as it takes. What do you make of that statement?
Well, I mean, the Germans are coming out with some very confusing statements. The one country in NATO that has been most openly adamant against accepting Ukraine at this time is Germany, because Germany knows that if Ukraine is added, that means that the German armed forces are the front line of the battle, and Germany itself is a target, and it's very, very close in range. We don't want to forget that Russia has a massive missile base in Kaliningrad, which is just a few seconds away from the German border when we're flying at Mach 12 and above. So Germany is speaking one thing to make its American puppet masters, because Germany is an American political and economic colony. They're making their puppet masters smile by attempting to encourage the Ukrainians with nothing more than a few nice sounding words. That will not work. The weapons that are going into Ukraine may be getting used, but usually we're seeing people who are joint Ukrainian citizens, an ethnic Ukrainian from America who's running a machine that the Ukrainians don't even know how to use yet. So we've got infiltration, we've got American troops, not openly, but in reality on the ground in Ukraine fighting already, and Germany is the country that will take the brunt of the retaliation if anything goes any further, and the Germans simply aren't ready to do that. They are saying no.
Right. Well, Ray McGovern, the U.S. came out, which is now a pretty, it's one of the phrases that really stands out when it comes to the question of what is the U.S.'s goal when it comes to this, what some have called a proxy war. And we can't forget what the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, and he said, it's to weaken Russia. Now, we're looking at 15 months of this to have gone by at this point. Do you think it's looking more like the longer this special military operation is taking place, that to weaken Russia is really looking like it's weakening the U.S. when you look at the U.S. and NATO countries not able to defeat Russia?
I believe that's correct. Yeah. Worse still, do NATO countries really want more than 1 million, maybe 2 million now, Russian heavily armed troops on their border? I don't think they should want that. I don't think the Russians covet places like Poland or the Baltic states. But, you know, if I were in the Baltic or Poland, I would not want 2 million Russians arrayed at my border, ready for any provocation that some crazy Pole or some crazy Lithuanian might want to mount. So the deleterious effects of this thing are just astounding, and it's really amazing that these political hacks listen to Washington and the likes of Victoria Nuland and don't come to their common sense and do the right thing.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that. Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst on the phone there from Raleigh, North Carolina. John Busnich, thank you for your input. Journalist, activist, and political analyst from Belgrade. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From me, Kaveh Tagway and the team. It's goodbye.